The trouble started, as these things often do, with a single letter in a cheap envelope, the kind folded and taped to your door with all the subtlety of a parking ticket. I came home from work one Tuesday afternoon to find it stuck half-heartedly against my front door, the HOA's ugly blue and white logo bleeding through the paper like an old bruise. Notice of noncompliance. Immediate action required. Those words, bolded and centered at the top, didn't surprise me. I had lived in this neighborhood long enough to understand how the Homeowners Association operated. The rules weren't about safety, community, or aesthetics. They were about control, enforced by clipboard-carrying retirees and power-hungry board members who needed something, anything, to fill the void left behind by careers long ended and children long grown. But this letter, this one struck a nerve. The violation? Unauthorized agricultural development. In plain English, my vegetable garden. For the past 3 summers, I'd worked tirelessly to build that garden in the corner of my yard, tucked neatly behind a tasteful cedar fence, bordering the edge of the HOA's prized greenbelt, that thin strip of land they maintain at great expense to keep the neighborhood looking natural, while preventing any actual nature from thriving. Tomatoes, peppers, carrots, even a little patch of herbs. Nothing excessive, nothing offensive, just honest, quiet labor growing something for myself in a world that seemed increasingly obsessed with convenience and appearances. Apparently, this offended someone. Karen Hamilton, HOA president, full-time menace, part-time real estate agent who fancied herself the gatekeeper of our suburban kingdom. Karen didn't like my garden. Not because it was messy, it wasn't. Not because it was unsightly. I'd had neighbors compliment it often. No, Karen disliked it because it wasn't on the HOA's list of approved landscaping elements. In her mind, flowers were fine. Shrubs were acceptable. Grass was mandatory. But vegetables? Vegetables reeked of rebellion. She hadn't said as much, of course. Karen spoke in that clipped, polite tone suburban tyrants specialize in. Every sentence laced with condescension. Every smile hiding sharpened teeth. The first warning letter came months ago. I thought it was a mistake. The second seemed petty. The third, the one threatening fines and legal action, told me this wasn't about policy. This was personal. The HOA meetings, when I attended them, were spectacles of passive-aggressive theater. Karen perched at the head of the long plastic folding table, like a queen presiding over peasants, flanked by her hand-picked enforcers. Retired men with hearing aids turned conveniently down when dissent arose, and neighborhood busybodies eager to flex authority over things that didn't concern them. I brought up my garden once, calmly explaining that it sat within my property lines, posed no safety risk, and brought no blight to the neighborhood. I showed photos, cited state statutes about property rights, even mentioned the mental health benefits of gardening. Karen listened, nodded, and smiled the whole time. Then she ruled against me anyway. Regulations are regulations, she said. We must think of property values. As if my peppers might cause a market collapse. The neighborhood wasn't blind to this nonsense. I'd noticed sympathetic glances from other homeowners, murmured comment about overreach, about Karen's power trip. But sympathy is cheap when people fear citations on their own doorsteps. No one stood up. Not yet. And so, in early spring, the notices became threats, and the threats became action. I came home one Thursday to find my garden, my hours of planting, tending, watering, gone. Bulldozed, flattened, mulched over with HOA-mandated sod, hastily laid, and already browning at the edges. A contractor's truck sat parked nearby, its driver chatting casually with Karen herself, clipboard in hand. She didn't wave. She didn't apologize. She just smiled that thin-lipped smile of hers, the one that said, "This is what happens when you don't listen." There was no prior notice, no court order, no legal right. But Karen, as always, operated under the assumption that her position granted her immunity, that no one would fight back, that I, like so many others before me, would grumble, pay my fine, and replant something more acceptable. She was wrong. That night, I stood where my garden had been, hands shoved deep in my pockets, staring at the scarred earth beneath the cheap sod. I thought about all the work undone, the time stolen, the principle ignored. And then I thought about forests, not just trees, not just plants. Forest spaces too big to control, too rooted to be erased by petty rules and HOA bylaws. Wild places that swallowed fences, ignored property lines, and outlived presidents and clipboards alike. That's when the idea took root. Not revenge, not yet, not exactly. Something quieter, slower, more insidious. I started small, as all forests do. First, I researched property lines, greenbelt ordinances, conservation laws. I found loopholes Karen hadn't considered. I learned about rewilding, about native species protection, about the slow but unstoppable force of nature reclaiming space. Then I reached out to neighbors, to the quieter ones, the gardeners, the bird watchers, the folks who smiled faintly at HOA meetings but never spoke. I found common ground in their grievances. We shared stories, laughed over Karen's absurdity, and realized something important. I wasn't alone. Together, we began to plant. Not vegetables this time. Not anything the HOA could cite or bulldoze without risking headlines. We planted wildflowers along the edges of the greenbelt, buried bushes beneath the HOA-approved maples. Saplings where grass once struggled. Slowly, methodically, we turned neglected corners of the neighborhood into sanctuaries. We called it a community beautification initiative. Karen called it a nuisance. But the bylaws, her precious bylaws, couldn't stop it. Not without admitting that the HOA didn't actually own the greenbelt, or that they were targeting environmentally beneficial projects. We documented everything. Photographed children planting trees. Hosted pollinator workshops. Invited the local paper. Karen fumed, but publicly she had to smile. Privately, she sent more notices. Fines piled up on my doorstep, like leaves in fall. I paid none of them. The tension simmered. Neighbors who once stayed silent began to speak. At meetings, Karen's supporters thinned. Whispers grew louder. People questioned her leadership, her motives, her relentless vendetta against something as simple as growth. I stayed patient. Let roots take hold. Let time do what time does best. Because what Karen didn't understand, what she couldn't fight, was that a garden might be torn up in a day, but a forest fights back. It creeps. It spreads. It builds allies in sunlight and soil. It buries pettiness beneath seasons of change. And it waits. As spring bled into summer, and summer into fall, my little rebellion took shape. The greenbelt flourished. Birds returned. Butterflies danced. Children played among trees their parents had planted. Property values rose. The neighborhood bloomed. And Karen began to lose control. But that part, the retaliation, the revenge, that's still to come. Karen Hamilton wasn't just the HOA president. She was the embodiment of every cliché about suburban busybodies wrapped up in one neatly pressed linen pantsuit. And after my little community beautification, efforts started gaining momentum. It didn't take long for her to shift gears from passive-aggressive to outright hostile. At first, she played the way she always did, with memos, mail notices, and cleverly disguised threats buried in HOA jargon. Failure to comply. Continued disregard. Review of privileges pending. She had a knack for making small words sound bigger than they were, a talent sharpened by years of HOA meetings and her self-appointed role as protector of neighborhood appearances. But this time, her efforts weren't landing the same. Something had changed. It wasn't just me anymore. Neighbors who had once mowed their lawns in silence were now tending wildflower patches in broad daylight. People who had never spoken up at meetings were suddenly quoting environmental statutes back at her. A group of retirees on the far cul-de-sac organized a butterfly garden in protest of recent HOA overreach. Even the neighborhood Facebook page, usually a bland feed of garage sale ads and lost cat posts, was filled with sarcastic memes about authorized grass length and illegal daisies. Karen tried to stomp it out. She showed up at my property with her clipboard in hand, and 2 HOA board members trailing behind like mall cops on patrol. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same woman who had bulldozed my vegetable garden without warning now wanted to lecture me about proper procedure. "This," she said, gesturing broadly at the greenbelt behind my fence where new saplings were starting to take root, is unauthorized use of community property. I smiled. Actually, it's reforestation, completely within county guidelines. Improves property values, promotes wildlife, reduces runoff. Her lips tightened. You've been warned already. So have you, I said, and I handed her a neatly bound packet of legal filings. Copies of county approvals, statements from environmental organizations, and a growing list of signatures from homeowners supporting the initiative. Her fingers twitched against her clipboard. We'll see what the board has to say about this. Oh, I think we both know what the board's going to say. Half of them planted those trees themselves. That wasn't hyperbole. Over the past few months, I'd watched alliances shift like tectonic plates beneath the HOA's carefully curated facade. Board members who once nodded along with Karen's every decree had begun to quietly peel away, distancing themselves from her increasingly erratic behavior. At the last meeting, someone even suggested, half-jokingly, that Karen might need to step down for good of the community. The look on her face then mirrored the one she wore now, brittle, forced, cracking around the edges. But Karen wasn't the type to go quietly. That's when she started escalating. The citations became absurd. Unauthorized watering of non-HOA-approved foliage, improper soil amendments, excessive bird feeders. Each fine was more ludicrous than the last, stacking up like dominoes in a game only she was playing. When paperwork failed to intimidate, she turned to harassment by proxy. Anonymous complaints flooded the HOA hotline. Suspiciously similar handwriting, strangely uniform wording. HOA volunteers began showing up to inspect my property on random afternoons. Drones buzzed over my yard, clearly operated by someone without much drone experience given how often they crashed into trees. Through it all, I stayed calm, documented everything, built my own file, thicker by the week. Neighbors whispered about legal action, about voting her out, but I urged patience. Let her dig her own hole deeper. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in early October. I woke up to shouting outside. Through the window, I saw Karen, in full HOA regalia, clipboard in hand, barking at a group of neighborhood kids who had gathered in the newly planted wildflower meadow to release monarch butterflies they'd raised in class. Parents were filming on their phones, horrified. One father stepped forward, voice raised. Karen threatened to fine him for unsupervised children damaging community property. That's when I walked outside. Karen, I said, calm as ever, you might want to stop. You're being recorded. Her head snapped toward me, eyes narrowed. You don't own this green belt. You don't get to dictate what happens here. I held up my phone, recording. Neither do you. Not without a vote. Not without approval. Not anymore. She sputtered, waving her clipboard like a weapon. I am the HOA president. Not for long, someone muttered from the crowd. Cameras caught it. Neighbors nodded. That video spread faster than any notice Karen had ever mailed. Within hours, it was on Facebook, TikTok, next door. HOA president yells at kids for releasing butterflies. The comments were brutal. The optics, worse. Even the local news caught wind, airing a 2-minute segment about suburban power struggles gone too far. That night, an emergency HOA board meeting was called. Karen showed up wearing her usual armor of forced politeness and righteous indignation. But the board, once a rubber-stamp committee, had grown weary. We've reviewed the footage, one member said, flipping through a stack of papers. We've also reviewed the bylaws, the county guidelines, and the petition from nearly half the homeowners here. Karen crossed her arms. You're all being manipulated. No, another board member said, we're done being bullied. They stripped her of her presidency that night. Officially, the minutes would reflect a vote for leadership restructuring due to community concerns. Unofficially, Karen was finished. Or so we thought, because Karen still had one move left, and it wasn't subtle. The next morning, I woke to find my yard, not the greenbelt, my private property, marked with orange flags. A contractor's truck idled nearby, men unloading tools. I my fence line. Karen stood beside them, arms folded, smirking. We're removing unauthorized plantings as per HOA directive. I laughed. You're not HOA president anymore. Her smile widened. Oh, but I am until Monday. The vote's effective next week. Technically, she was right. Legally, she was wrong. And so was the contractor, who clearly hadn't checked the permits before accepting the job. Police were called. Lawyers, too. The contractors left, confused and frustrated. Karen left in a huff, swearing this wasn't over. But it was. For her. Because I wasn't just planting trees anymore. I was planting consequences. And soon everyone, including Karen, would watch them grow. Karen's mistake wasn't just trying to bulldoze my vegetable garden. It wasn't even a stunt she pulled with the orange flags and contractors after her presidency was all but stripped away. Her real mistake, the fatal flaw in all her HOA-fueled tyranny, was assuming I was the kind of person who played defense. But I didn't build that garden because I was fragile. I didn't plant trees because I was passive. I did those things because I understood something people like Karen never did. Roots run deep, and once they're down, tearing them up only makes them spread wider. Karen wanted to control the neighborhood with rules and citations. I planned to control it with something far more permanent. Community. The Monday after her failed final act, she was officially removed from the HOA presidency. But like any suburban tyrant deposed, she didn't fade quietly into the HOA newsletter archives. She lingered like a weed you hadn't quite pulled from the root. She filed appeals. She submitted petty complaints. She even showed up to meetings as a concerned resident, trying to leverage the few allies she had left. I stayed silent during those weeks, watching from the sidelines, letting her bird herself out in front of everyone. Behind the scenes, I was busy. My first step was simple: amplify the movement. The so-called Greenbelt Beautification Project was now the talk of the neighborhood. Families who had never spoken to one another were organizing weekend planning sessions. Retirees swapped gardening tips over fences instead of HOA gossip. Kids built birdhouses. Someone even started a neighborhood Instagram account showcasing the transformation, gaining hundreds of followers from nearby communities who cheered us on. It wasn't just grassroots. It was roots and leaves and wings. I leaned into this momentum with precision, reached out to the county's Environmental Preservation Office, explaining what we'd accomplished. Their response surprised even me. They loved it. They wanted to partner. Suddenly, we weren't just neighbors planting trees. We were a recognized community conservation initiative eligible for grants and publicity. The local news that had chuckled at Karen yelling about butterflies now returned with cameras to highlight our success. Headlines read, "Neighborhood turns HOA battle into environmental win." Even the mayor's office sent a commendation letter. Karen's allies dwindled fast after that. But retaliation isn't just about winning in public. It's about securing your position so thoroughly that no one dares challenge you again. So I went further. With legal advice from a neighbor who happened to be a retired land use attorney, we dug deeper into the HOA's covenants. Turns out, they were riddled with inconsistencies, outdated clauses, and loopholes big enough to drive a lawn care truck through. We proposed amendments. First, clear protections for environmental initiatives. Second, limits on the HOA board's power to issue unilateral citations without due process. Third, a committee oversight structure requiring community votes for major decisions. I drafted the proposals. My neighbors circulated petitions. Within weeks, we had the signatures required to force a vote at the next HOA election. Karen, of course, tried to block it, claimed procedural violations, threatened lawsuits, sent increasingly frantic emails full of underlined words and exclamation points. But no one listened anymore. The vote passed with overwhelming support. We didn't just change the rules. We rewrote the future of the neighborhood. And as the new Community Greenbelt Stewardship Committee chair, I had more authority over those trees and gardens than Karen had ever dreamed of wielding with her clipboard. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Still, for all her defeats, Karen had one last ember of petty spite to fan. Her lawsuit. Yes, she filed one, alleging harassment, property devaluation, emotional distress. It was laughable on its face, but lawsuits aren't about truth. They're about leverage, and Karen thought she could bleed me dry in legal fees, if nothing else. Unfortunately for her, She underestimated how much documentation I collected over the past year. Emails, recordings, witness statements, footage from the day she brought unauthorized contractors onto my land. My lawyer, the retired neighbor, practically salivated at the countersuit opportunities. We filed swiftly. Harassment, defamation, trespassing, destruction of property, malicious prosecution. Her legal threats collapsed under the weight of our evidence like a folding chair at a garden party. By the time it reached mediation, Karen didn't just withdraw her suit. She signed a settlement, agreeing never to interfere with my property or the Greenbelt again. The HOA board barred her from holding any future office. She was effectively powerless. But I wasn't finished. I turned her legacy, that petty, suffocating need for control, into something the neighborhood could be proud of. The once-forgotten Greenbelt became a certified wildlife habitat. We installed walking trails, educational signs for kids about native species, benches donated by families who wanted to leave something lasting, seasonal festivals celebrating the blooms. I planted a tree at the heart of it all, a tall oak, ringed by stones etched with the names of those who helped make it happen. I named it unofficially, of course, Karen's Folly. It became a bit of neighborhood lore, a quiet joke among us. And Karen? She still lived here, still walked her dog past the thriving, vibrant forest she had tried so hard to kill. Only now, the smiles from neighbors weren't polite anymore. They were victorious, because she didn't just lose a garden war. She lost control. She lost relevance. And I gained a forest. The irony of revenge is that sometimes the sweetest form doesn't look like revenge at all, at least not on the surface. It doesn't come with fireworks or dramatic confrontations. It doesn't even come with angry shouting matches across property lines. Sometimes it looks like quiet success blooming right where someone tried to destroy you. And that's exactly how things played out. The day our Greenbelt was officially recognized as a protected community habitat by the county, Karen wasn't invited. She wasn't on any of the guest lists, no longer held any titles, and certainly didn't belong to any of the committees that had brought this all to fruition. But she showed up anyway. Not because she supported it. Not even because she was curious. Karen showed up because people like her can't help themselves. They need to see the damage they think they've caused. They need confirmation that the people who defied them are secretly failing, that all their petty wars, all their citations and emails and HOA tantrums ultimately worked. But standing there on that bright Saturday morning, surrounded by local press, community leaders, kids releasing butterflies, and neighbors who now spoke to one another like old friends, there was no failure for her to find. What she found was a thriving, living monument to everything she tried to prevent. The once patchy strip of ignored land behind my fence was now a vibrant, flourishing nature walk. Wildflowers lined the paths. Newly planted trees stretched their green fingers toward the sun. Bird song filled the air in place of Karen's shrill complaints. Signs marked species of plants and animals returning to the area thanks to our efforts. It wasn't just a park. It was proof that community could outlast pettiness, that growth could swallow bitterness whole. Karen hovered near the perimeter, like a ghost at her own funeral. I noticed her glaring at the plaque we'd unveiled earlier, one dedicating the Greenbelt to those who believe growth will always triumph over destruction. A little passive-aggressive, sure, but poetic justice demands at least a wink. Neighbors walked past her without acknowledgement. The new HOA board didn't greet her. Even the county commissioner, there to cut the ceremonial ribbon, seemed to steer clear. I could have ignored her entirely. That would have been mercy. But I'm human, so I approached. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I said, standing beside her at the fence line. She didn't look at me. "It's illegal what you did." Funny, county seems to disagree. So does the HOA, and the state, for that matter. Her jaw tightened. It's not what this neighborhood was meant to be. "Maybe not," I said, "but it's what it needed to become." She didn't answer, just stood there, gripping the fence post so tightly her knuckles turned white. Watching as kids ran laughing through the trees, she tried to bulldoze. Watching as neighbors posed for photos beneath banners, celebrating the success of something she'd fought tooth and nail to destroy. What Karen didn't realize is that she'd been part of this, too. Every time she cited me, every time she harassed a neighbor, every time she stomped through the space with her clipboard and her threats, she watered the very seeds of rebellion that led to this moment. Her legacy wasn't dead grass and regulation-approved shrubbery anymore. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of community defiance. I left her there, rooted to the spot like one of the trees she hated. But this isn't just a story about personal victory. It's about how retaliation, when done right, benefits more than just the person retaliating. It uplifts everyone who's been stepped on, everyone who's been silenced by people like Karen. And it leaves behind something better than anger. It leaves behind growth. The Greenbelt wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The success of our project attracted attention beyond our little neighborhood. Environmental groups started visiting, asking for partnerships. Local schools scheduled field trips. The press kept coming back, running follow-up stories about how a petty HOA dispute turned into a beacon of suburban restoration. Even developers in surrounding areas started reevaluating how they handle their green spaces, citing our neighborhood as proof that residents cared more about sustainability than uniform lawns. And all the while, Karen shrank. Her social circle, once tight-knit and full of authority, dissolved. Former allies found new hobbies. The Facebook group she used to dominate went quiet whenever she posted. She stopped walking her dog through the Greenbelt, stopped attending HOA meetings altogether. People say she started keeping her blinds drawn, that she began ordering groceries online, so she wouldn't have to run into neighbors at the store. In a way, I pitied her, not because I regretted anything. She earned every bit of her downfall, but because her inability to adapt had made her a relic in a neighborhood that had moved on without her. But karma wasn't quite done. Months after the Greenbelt's dedication, Karen's home went up for sale. A quiet listing, no fanfare. She moved out under cover of dusk, her yard overgrown, her porch light burned out. The kicker? The property listing described the neighborhood as adjacent to a thriving community forest, ideal for nature lovers. The very thing she tried to destroy became the biggest selling point for her own house. I framed a printout of that listing and hung it inside the community center, not out of spite, out of irony, out of celebration, because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about transformation, about how one person's pettiness couldn't stop a whole neighborhood from planning something bigger, stronger, and far more permanent. Years from now, long after Karen's name is forgotten, these trees will still stand. Birds will still nest. Kids will still chase butterflies down winding paths shaded by the very growth she fought against. And maybe, just maybe, someone new will read that dedication plaque and smile. Not because they know the story, but because they understand the message. You can cut down a garden. You can pull up roots. But you can't stop people from planting something better. A year passed. Then, too, seasons changed, and with them, so did the neighborhood. What had started as a petty war over a vegetable garden transformed into something no HOA president, no clipboard-wielding tyrant, no passive-aggressive Karen could ever have anticipated. A true community. The Greenbelt flourished faster than anyone predicted. What had once been patches of dirt and struggling, saplings grew into dense, vibrant life. The trees we planted stood tall now, casting wide pools of shade across winding paths. Butterflies danced through the air like tiny, triumphant flags. Families came from across town to picnic, walk, or simply breathe in the air that felt a little freer, a little more rebellious, because of what had been fought for here. The county eventually installed an official sign at the main entrance. It read, Midsummer Forest, a community restoration project, founded by residents, protected for generations. Below it, smaller brass lettering credited the HOA and its members by name, my neighbors, those who stood up when standing up wasn't easy. Karen's name, conspicuously absent, had been scrubbed from every official record related to the project, not out of pettiness. Though, admittedly, it felt satisfying, but because history doesn't bother remembering the villains who tried to stop progress. It only remembers those who built something better. Irony works like roots. It runs deep, And the roots of Karen's downfall spread wider than she could have imagined. Months after she moved away in quiet disgrace, we heard whispers about her new neighborhood. Another HOA, of course, but this one wasn't so easily manipulated. Rumor had it she tried her same tactics. Complaints about hedges, nitpicking over mailbox colors, citing bylaws like scripture. Only this time, no one played along. They saw her coming. People know better now. The legend of Karen the Destroyer of Gardens traveled faster than she did. A neighbor forwarded me a screenshot from a Facebook group in her new town. Watch out for this one. It read, "She tried to file noise complaints against birds." I laughed for a solid minute. Back home, life settled into something peaceful, something stable. Kids who once feared HOA patrols now rode bikes freely under the trees. Retirees who used to squabble over fence lines now shared coffee beneath sun-dappled leaves. Even the HOA meetings transformed from battlegrounds into genuine community forums. No power trips, no screaming matches, just neighbors working together. We held an annual midsummer festival now, a celebration of how far we'd come. Booths lined the greenbelt paths, homemade crafts, local honey vendors, kids selling lemonade. There were speeches, of course, thank yous, acknowledgments of hard work and patience. But the real centerpiece each year was the ceremonial planting of a new tree. The first year, I planted it myself. The second year, my neighbors did. By the third, we let the children take over. Because that's what this was all really for. Not just to heal the scars Kara left behind, but to ensure no one else could scar this place again. We built roots so deep no future tyrant could rip them up without tearing down everything around them. People ask sometimes if I regret how far it all went. If I regret letting it escalate from a garden to lawsuits to rewriting the fabric of our neighborhood. They ask if I'd do it again. And I answer every time, absolutely. Because this wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about Karen. It was about what kind of place we wanted to live in, what kind of world we wanted to leave behind. You don't fight battles like this because you enjoy the fight. You fight them because the alternative is letting people like Karen win, letting bitterness and control choke the life out of something that was meant to grow wild and free. Karen thought she could use rules to destroy something living. In the end, all she did was give us a reason to grow it bigger. And speaking of irony, remember that plot of land where my vegetable garden once stood? It's part of the Greenbelt now, officially protected. I still tend a little garden there, tucked between trees and wildflowers. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs. Nothing fancy. Just something to remind me of where this all started. Visitors often stop to admire the space. They ask about the history. Sometimes they even ask if the stories about Karen are true. I usually just smile and say, we don't talk about her much anymore. The trees speak louder than I ever could. But the best part? Right beside my little plot grows a tall, healthy oak. The first tree we planted after Karen's final defeat. Locals nicknamed it the Karen tree. Not out of cruelty, out of remembrance. A reminder of what can happen when pettiness meets perseverance. Beneath its branches, life thrives. Children play. Couples stroll. Neighbors gather without fear of citations or threats. And every root beneath their feet tells the same quiet story. You can try to pull up what's growing. You can try to control it. But growth always finds a way. Epilogue. Years later, long after Karen faded into suburban obscurity, our Greenbelt was featured in a documentary about environmental justice and grassroots activism. The narrator's voiceover said something that stuck with me. Sometimes the smallest act of resistance plant the biggest forests. That clip went viral. The neighborhood gained a little fame. But more importantly, it gained strength. The kind of strength Karen never understood. The strength of people standing together, planting roots not just in soil, but in each other. And that's a story worth telling. Again and again.